the Chief Minister says that every option is on the table to deal with crime in the Red Centre. She's listened to the concerns of the community and heard their frustrations and seen firsthand the challenges that they're facing. Now, based on the consultation, she says over the past couple of days, the government are now, they've identified several critical areas that require federal government attention, including Centrelink payments to be made on current takeaway alcohol-free days only, the reintroduction of compulsory work or training programs with fortnightly reporting obligations to Centrelink recipients, as well as conducting a performance audit of federally funded programs, along with ensuring royalty distributions are made in communities not in Alice Springs, the implementation of 100% income management for parents of youth offenders, and accepting the Northern Territory Government's referral to the federal government for parents who neglect their children, enabling additional income management. Now, joining me on the show is the Minister for Territory Families, Robin Carl, Children and Territory Families, I should say. Robin Carl, good morning to you, Minister.
Good morning, Katie.
Thanks so much for your time this morning. Now, Minister, how were things over the weekend in Alice Springs? Do you know?
Well, I'm actually really pleased to be able to report that the Circuit Breaker program that we launched last Friday had a significant impact on the ground in Alice Springs over the weekend. So 7 young people were referred to the program via the co-responder model, and 4 in Darwin as well, if people are interested.
Yep.
And the really interesting thing is the feedback from the police on the ground, the community on the ground, was that having that in place and having it very actively out there made a significant difference, because we were able to intervene before those kids got themselves into trouble.
So talk our listeners through, because we were so busy on Friday with everything that was going on in Alice Springs that a lot of people would have missed the news about this Circuit Breaker program. Talk us through exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to support young people at risk and really hold parents accountable for their children's behaviour.
So we've been working on this program for the last couple of months, and it was really looking at what resources we had in place and how we could bolster them. So essentially we've got 3 departments plus the police department all working very closely together to try and intervene before kids get themselves into trouble. So whether it's the first time that a young person's been picked up by police, or if it's the 20th time they've been picked up, there'll be an immediate referral to Department of Children's and Families Youth Worker Team. They'll go collect the child. Then the assessment will be done whether it's okay to take the child home. If not, we have safe sleeping spaces for out-of-hour collections both in Alice Springs and in Darwin.
Yep.
And the child will be taken there. The parents, guardians will be notified where they are. And then the next day, there's an engagement with the families to enter into a parental and family responsibility agreement. So that's step 1. And then it'll be looking at whether they're attending school. If they're not, trying to figure out why not, looking at other programs we can actually channel their energy into so that they're distracted, if you like, from getting involved in the wrong group and doing the wrong thing.
Yep.
We'll be doing health checks with them to make sure there's no underlying issue that may not have been picked up. And the really exciting thing at the moment in Alice Springs is that the school attendance officers are working all through the vacation period, so they'll be working closely with the youth support team as well, so that when school comes back at the end of January, those kids that we know have been disengaged from school, they'll be on the radar. We'll be working with them directly.
Robin, most people listening this morning are going to be thinking, how is this not already happening? How are we not in a situation where if there's kids running around on the street that this isn't already happening?
Well, I asked myself that same question, which is why I've done the work with the department over the last couple of months. And it really stemmed from discussions around that mythical responsible adult, which I just tell the listeners I've banned the use of that term because it doesn't exist. So that situation where a kid was picked up by police, dropped home, they'd leave, they'd get picked up again, they'd be dropped home, they'd leave, they'd get dropped back. It was this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So while there was the opportunity for police and youth outreach workers to connect to drop kids home, that underlying work wasn't embedded in the program. So absolutely, I don't understand why it's taken to this point to be able to do it, but what I can tell you is that the youth workers in particular are really excited about having that extra layer of oomph, if you like, in being able to work with the families. We actually had the very first family involved here in Darwin.
Right.
So on Saturday Friday morning.
Yep.
Sorry. Friday morning, we had a young person drop to our safe place at 5:30 in the morning, and by that afternoon we had a parental family responsibility agreement in place and a wraparound service for that young person. So over the weekend, we've had a total of 9 programs put in place where the team will be working very closely with those families and making sure we try and keep those kids on track.
Robin, do you think we're going to see some tangible differences on the streets, out in public places with some of these young people that have maybe been engaged in pretty ordinary behaviour, to put it mildly?
I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that the critical component of this is for the staff who are out there on the ground knowing that they have my absolute 150% backing and that we will do this together. And the opportunity for us is to trial this now in the process that we've put together and tweak it as we need to, because my goal is to roll it out across the entire territory. If we can get to those kids before they are embedded in a cycle of doing the wrong thing, and we can actually get them distracted into doing sport or music or a job at the local servo or whatever it is, where they actually take some pride in who they are and what they're doing, absolutely, I have absolute confidence we're going to see a difference.
Minister, from your perspective, I mean, as the Minister for Children and Families, when you hear a situation like the one that unfolded last week in Alice Springs, where we've reportedly got 2 teenagers involved in a home invasion, which saw a baby seriously injured, and they reportedly had a combined 300 previous charges and have been bailed 35 times. What do you think that says about the system and the work that you are now involved in?
Well, it says it very clear the system was broken. In a million pieces, it was shattered. And you could have young people who were repeatedly involved in these sorts of behaviours and apparently could persist with no consequence to that except to be continually caught and released. Clearly, the system isn't working, which is why we've put in place the package that we put in place, which we passed through Parliament in October, which becomes enacted at the beginning of 2025, where we can actually see the violent offenders who will not be given a presumption of bail, where we'll see domestic violence offenders wearing electronic monitoring, where we'll actually see these young people who are so desperately in need of help being actually given alternatives, very clear, very solid alternatives. But at the end of the day, if they continue to break the law, if they continue to create havoc in our community, there will be consequences for their actions.
To look at this, I guess, from a different kind of perspective, to some of the kids that, not in a situation, I don't think, like this one where they've been bailed 35 times, but to some young people that may be front court, that are maybe in the, the youth court system, and there aren't a lot of options, or it seems like there may not be a lot of options for young people to be sentenced to, or to, to sort of have a consequence to their actions. Do you think that, some of the work that you're going to be doing behind the scenes might change that as well to some degree, so that it's not just simply a matter of, hey, you either go to jail or you let back out?
Absolutely. So over the last 8 weeks, I've been travelling across the territory, both in my capacity of Minister for Children and Families and also as the Minister for Trade, Business and Asian Relations. And I've sent the very clear message that we have to do this together. So I've met with a significant number of businesses, all of whom have indicated that they are really, really interested and willing and getting involved in providing some options for these young people. The critical element that's been missing is supervision for the young people. And I've even had discussions with the court system. I talked to one of the judges recently who reassured me that sentencing kids to court-ordered processes is something that they absolutely want to do, but the problem is that there's not enough supervision for those kids. So you can understand that. You've got a young person who the local cafe owner is going to say, look, I'm really, really happy to offer this young person a chance, but I can't be the one who has to make sure that they turn up or that they're here when they're meant to be. So it's that supervision component that's been missing. So I've been working with the department to look at how we can actually strengthen that and involve our youth workers in that aspect of things, so we actually can see these kids given an opportunity, because we all know that if you have a kid who just immediately thinks they're going to be in trouble, the whole demeanour and reaction responds that way. But if you've got a kid who you can say, look, we get it, you shouldn't have done this, it's not the right thing, but we're going to give you a chance to get it right, you can actually start to break down that cycle.
And of course, you're talking about very different situations than the one that we saw of, towards the end of last week, where these two teenagers have reportedly had such a huge volume of offences that they've previously committed. I mean, without going into too much detail, because I don't want to prejudice that in any way, shape or form, particularly for the victims in that situation. But, when you hear that and when you see that they've reportedly been bailed 35 times, do you start to question if the justice system is working in the way that it should be?
I think we can all agree that it's not. I think when you have a situation where you can have young offenders and, from the information we know, young violent offenders, and the situation that happened in Alice Springs is absolutely horrendous. And I know that we are all sending all of our good wishes to that family and for a speedy recovery for both mum and bub. I can't even comprehend an environment where you can have two young people who've offended to that degree to be bailed that often, to be out in the community with the opportunity to do more harm, that significant intervention hasn't occurred. And if we flip it over, and if they were at the age they must have been when they first got in trouble in the system, and we had a program in place such as the one we've just launched, there's a chance that we might not have been having this conversation. And we can't fix what's occurred in the past, but we can do everything in our power to prevent it continuing into the future.
Robin, I'll move along. I know that the Chief Minister has asked to meet with the federal government to look at other changes in Alice Springs. Two of those changes include implementing 100% income management for parents of youth offenders and accepting the Northern Territory Government's referral to the federal government for parents who neglect their children, enabling additional income management. Now, those final two will fall under your portfolios to some degree if they are to come into effect. How could they potentially work, and is there any concern that they could have an adverse impact?
I think one of the things that we have to be very mindful of is that we actually have to be able to unravel where the money's going. And certainly when you're talking about domestic, family and sexual violence situations, that can be really challenging. But the department are actually looking at that now, because we're very well aware that there are situations where we need to make sure the money's going to the right person, and two, that the children are front and centre of the finances coming in to that system. So we've actually made a number of referrals already to the federal government, none of which have been agreed to.
So what happens?
Which is very frustrating. There has been, the advice I have is that there is not a willingness at federal government level to change the percentages that are currently, so it's 60-40 currently. What we've been able to refer to at this point in time is 80-20, and the advice that I've received is that that's not met with a lot of support. So I've been asked, we're doing an audit to see just how many have actually been referred and how many have actually been refused, and on the advice I have so far, it's pretty much all of them.
Minister, when you say 80-20, what exactly are you referring to for our listeners?
Yeah, so people who are on get a Centrelink payment, so you can be set up so that 60% goes to the essentials, so food, clothing, rent, electricity, and then they have the discretion to spend the other 40% on whatever they want. So where we have kids who are in trouble and it's really obvious that the families are struggling, we've pushed to have that increased to 80% spent on the essentials and 20% discretionary. And that's where it sits at the moment. I understand the Chief is looking to increase that to 100%, so that 100% is spent on essentials, and that's a discussion she's having at federal level. What we need is the federal government to come on board and realise that we're asking for this because kids are at risk, families are at risk, and harm is being done.
I'll just take you across to one last thing before I let you go this morning. I understand you've launched a new campaign just this morning calling for Territorians to step up and speak out against domestic violence in the lead into Christmas. How are you getting that message out?
So it was great to be there with Charlie King this morning from the No More campaign and the two Dantes from the 100% campaign to actually remind our community that we all have an obligation to call out domestic, family and sexual violence. I think it's It's pretty easy when you see it every single day to become a little immune to it. So it was just a reminder, we're coming into Christmas. It's a really difficult time for people. There's lots of messaging going around to the community, lots of awareness campaigns, but most importantly, the main message is if you see something, report it. You can ring 1-800-RESPECT for assistance, or if you see an absolute critical situation, please don't step in and put yourself at harm's way, but please call 000 and get the police and ambulance services there as quickly as possible. It's
a pretty dire situation, isn't it, when there is domestic violence happening on the streets, like literally in plain sight for everyday Territorians to see.
Yes.
It's horrible, some of what's going on.
Yeah, it's terrible, and that we're in this situation just screams volumes of what hasn't happened in the past and failures of systems. And yes, there's lots of challenges around people moving between communities and coming into town. We have to make it easier for them to get home. We have to provide better support here. And that's one of the other reasons why we're looking very closely at the services that work well, that we will continue to invest in, and services that need development going forward into the new year.
Minister, one of the things that was raised last week by Marion Scrimgeour, the federal member for Lingiari, she had said, it might be time for us to look at mandatory sentencing for those who breach domestic violence orders. Is that something that's on the cards?
It's not something that's been discussed on the table, but I think, as the Chief has said, everything is up for discussion. Every option needs to be investigated, and one thing I will say, this is time for bipartisan support, and not just within the Northern Territory government, but federally as well.
Hey, just lastly, sorry, I'll ask you, I've got 100 questions for you this morning because there's so much going on, but I'm not sure whether you've seen the vision out of Catherine that's been reported on the Australian newspaper today. It's horrendous stuff. I mean, it's a lady being belted with a rock by other women. It is just appalling, and unfortunately another example of some of the horrific violence that is literally just happening on the streets of the Northern Territory.
Yeah, I was down in Catherine last week and speaking to a lot of the service workers down there. They are certainly just at the end of their tether trying to work out why this is at the degree it is, why we're not seeing any impact. And absolutely we've just got to focus on their services in Catherine are under pressure. I know that the Police Commissioner has been looking at resourcing into Catherine, as well as the extra resourcing that's gone into Alice Springs over the last little while. We have to stop it before it starts. I know that doesn't mean that we still have to deal with what's going on today, but it's going to keep going if we don't focus on stopping where it starts. So that's why we're focusing on the kids. And if we do that, then the other services will flow on from that.
Well, Robin Cahill, Minister for Children and Families here in the Northern Territory, great to speak with you this morning. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Wait time 46 minutes. You are the fourth person in the queue. You are the fifth person in the queue.
When your internet gives you lemons, get Tangerine.
You are the shortest person in the queue.
Easy setup, short hold times, no confusion, and great value NBN plans with 6-month new customer discounts.
You are the worst person in the queue.
Tangerine. It's just refreshingly simple internet. Make the switch at tangerinetelecom.com.au. Terms and conditions apply.